Hey, tonight I'm going to talk about a video about men's rights activism. A video called Ultimate Guide to the MRA Part 1, made by Hannibal 13. Let's start with saying that I think this is a very good video and I recommend everybody to see it. Having said that, I have done my part praising it, and now I'm going to focus on the things I don't agree with. There are two things I strongly disagree with, and there are some really basic things I think need to be explored further. The two things I strongly disagree with, it's one categorical statement about rape, and it's one categorical statement about the basis of the whole men's rights movement. The things I think need further exploration, that's the core issues of group agency, rights for one group versus rights for another group, and claims of contradictions. On those parts I do agree with Hannibal, but it needs some further discussion. It's not as simple as he makes it. Let's start with the simplest issue of all, rape. Hannibal claims that rape is permanent. Once you have been raped, you are scarred for life. And I'm not going to disagree with Hannibal's argument here. He's arguing that rape is a very serious offense, and I do agree with that. And it is important to point out that, yes, being raped can scar a person for life, and that has to be taken into account. If you abuse someone, sexually or otherwise, you must be prepared that this might leave permanent damage on your victim, and the court has to take that into account, regardless of whether permanent damage actually occur or not. You don't get to take that risk with another person's life. However, it is destructive to claim categorically that rape scars a person for life, because this can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. People who get abused, sexually or otherwise, need support to get out of it. Telling them that their life is pretty much over, that is a common trope in our society, and it's one we need to fight. It is extremely destructive. And this is the only reason I'm bringing this up. Again, I agree with the argument for which Hannibal makes this point, but I really have to disagree with the point itself. Lots of people suffer through horrible abuse, sexually or otherwise, and some just shrug it off without any big damage, and some heal over time. It may be a matter of days, weeks, years, or decades, but they do eventually get over it. You don't have to be scarred for life. Don't listen to that kind of message, and don't spread that kind of message, because it is destructive. Okay, enough about rape. Moving on to the core emotion of the men's rights movement. Hannibal claims that men's rights activism is based on hate. He do have a point that a lot of MRA are filled with hate and are motivated by hate. But to categorically say that this is the core emotion of their movement, I think that is way too strong. If I'm going to pick a core emotion for the men's rights movement as I see it, that core emotion is rage. This emotion is closely associated with hate, indeed it is. And it can be interchangeable at some time. But the distinction is important. I think for a lot of MRA, it's not about hating women. It's not about hating individual women. It's not about hating women as a gender. It's about being furious about being mistreated. And this is something we should listen to, actually, even when we don't agree. One of the first MRA videos I saw was made by Girl Writes What. The most important thing she said in this video, as far as I'm concerned, is that she said that we need to put up with a lot of bullshit from men's rights activists because they have been through horrible things. They have been at the hands of boy-hating school teachers and male-hating parents and male-hating society, abusive girlfriends, and so on and so on. And I think she's very right about that. A lot of people who turns to men's rights activism has actual reason to be angry. They are channeling their rage away from themselves. Instead of hating themselves, they find a story where they get to channel their hatred elsewhere. And this might be a good reaction. Of course, one very central thing here about this thing that Girl Writes What said is that it makes complete hypocrisy out of everything that she or any other MRA say about feminists. Because, well, I'm going to return to the issue of contradictions later, but this is one of the really core ones. You need to treat people equally, and if you're going to give MRA some free range because of shit a lot of them have been through, you have to do the same thing for feminism. And among feminists in general, and extreme feminists in particular, a lot of them are motivated by having been through terrible bullshit, being discriminated in society, being abused in various ways, in many cases being raped. I'm not going to argue about how common it is, but I know personally several feminists who have been raped, and it's one of the motivations for their being involved in politics in the first place, not wanting the next generation of women have to suffer through the same fate. And that is a noble goal, and anyone who isn't a hypocrite need to respect this both ways. We need to listen to people's rage. That doesn't mean that we have to swallow their bullshit. And Hannibal points out a lot of MRA bullshit in his video and will continue to do so in following videos, I'm sure. But this basic thing, we can't dismiss the MRA, the MRM, whatever, as just being haters. A lot of them have reason to be angry, and a lot of them don't take it out on women in general, although sadly a lot of them do, and that is pretty awful. And this is a big problem with the men's rights movement. A big fucking problem. For all practical reasons, it's a bigger problem than all the bullshit on the theoretical level. But anyway. Okay, moving on to the core issues. Hannibal the Victor 13 accuses the men's rights movement of three things. First of all, group agency, where they believe that women as a group have agency and it becomes a conspiracy theory about women's role in history. And second, that they are fighting for rights for one group at the expense of other people. And according to Hannibal, this is not a matter of rights at all when you do that. And finally, he accused them of a lot of contradictions. If these three accusations are true, then the entire intellectual project of the men's rights movement fall like a house of cards. It crumbles into dust. However, the men's rights movement is not the only thing that crumbles. And this is the important thing, actually, because these accusations are true. The theoretical framework for the men's rights movement is bullshit, but this is a bullshit that they share with movements that have much higher reputation. And I'm not saying that those movements are bullshit, and I'm not saying that the men's rights movement have to be bullshit, but all movements need to get rid of this destructive theoretical framework. First of all, group agency. Let's go back to Marx. I don't know if that's where the whole thing got started, but it but it is the thing that I think a lot of academics and activists go back to. We have this whole idea about the struggle between classes. A socio-economic class is assigned agency, and history is seen as a struggle between these groups. Assigning agency to groups is a mistake in the first place, but there is a bit of reason to it when you talk about macro scale socio-economic. And when I say a bit of let's just not go into that. I'm not going to discuss macro scale socio-economic issues tonight. Let's talk social psychology instead. Let's talk interaction between individuals and groups. Regardless of what you think about these Marxist ideas about macro scale socioeconomics, it do become a huge problem when these theories are imported into analyzing all kinds of relations between groups, and individuals are seen through this lens of groups. And this is what happens. Very much of social justice as a concept is built on dichotomies where you divide everybody into pairs of groups where one group is privileged and the other group is oppressed. This model do have a lot of merit. It is useful in certain contexts, but there is a huge over-reliance on this particular model, and that becomes absurd. Feminists are often accused of conspiracy theories about men, and patriarchy theory doesn't have to be a conspiracy theory about men, but it can be. Sometimes it is used that way. And when it comes to radical feminism, that's pretty common. In my experience, there is very little difference between radical feminism and the men's rights movement. They have simply switched the genders and otherwise kept the radical feminist framework intact. So group agency, that's a core part of the problem. I mean, in reality, it doesn't work like that. Categories of people don't have agency. It is people who have agency. And certain groups can act. Categories such as genders and skin color can't act. But in a way, to a very limited extent, an ideology or a religion or something like that can sort of have agency, but that is based on group identity, and it's actually leaders who have agency through people who parrot their message and believe in it and spread it and give it validity through group identity. A huge over-reliance on this as well is common in social justice, and the men's rights movement and now part of the racist movement are becoming parody mirrors of these social justice movements. And when it comes to the racists, I assume that they are outright trolls, that they are simply trying to confuse people by adopting a bit of social justice framework. But I do think a lot of people in the men's rights movement are actually honest. They are adopting this really limited vision where everything is squeezed into dichotomies between two groups, where one group has to be the oppressed group and the other group has to be the privileged group. The problem is that problems affecting men as a gender doesn't really fit into this limited model. But these men's rights ideologues are trying anyway. It becomes completely tortured logic when they are trying to fit men's experiences of being discriminated and subjected to bigotry into this kind of framework. I mean, the idea that men as a gender are categorically oppressed, while women as a gender are categorically privileged, that is ludicrous. But that doesn't mean that these activists are trolls. It doesn't mean that they are being dishonest, and it doesn't mean that they don't have a valid point. What they lack is a valid theoretical framework. They are using a framework that was a bit of bullshit in the beginning, but it was at least useful bullshit when applied to groups that actually were oppressed on a grand scale. Social justice movements have used a useful model, but they have used a large over-reliance on this model. And now we see the results, and it's quite pathetic sometimes, actually. So let's move on to the second point, where Hannibal rightfully accuses men's rights activists for talking about rights for men at the expense of other groups. This is common in what I have seen of men's rights activism, but it's also common in more legitimate social justice movements, except it becomes a bit more legitimate when you're actually advocating for a grand scale oppressed group and want them to have benefits and rights at the expense of a group that actually is privileged. But it is still problematic. And I think this problem has put a lot of boys through hell. In school, with parents, with girlfriends. and so on. And Hannibal, this goes to you personally. Think a bit about your privilege. You and I are in very much the same position, I think, and I've been thinking a lot of my privilege lately, and I'm not talking about my privileged my privilege as white and male. I'm talking about my privilege as a highly educated, socially stable, and so on white man. We are among those white men who actually gain those benefits assigned to the white skin color and the male gender, while a lot of the people in the men's rights movement are men who actually don't get very much of these benefits. And I can understand that they get furious with getting the blame and getting the responsibility heaped over them when they actually don't get very much out of it. For starters, and this is not about me and you anymore, I'm talking about a more general level now. One big thing about patriarchy when it comes to the individual men benefiting from it, it's their role as head of the family. And that system is dying already, and those men who actually get those benefits, well, they're not in the MRM. Okay, so that's big part of the problem. And finally, contradictions. Those things that you, Hannibal, point out, well, yeah, those are contradictions if they are said by someone who is even trying to be fair. But what if you're not trying to be fair? What if you're categorically trying to help one specific group and don't care about other groups? Then it isn't a contradiction. You can call that hypocrisy, but you have to be fair. If that is hypocrisy by men's rights activists, then it's also hypocrisy when done by feminists and anti-racists and so on. And I have done a bit of this myself in my days, and I'm not ashamed of that because we have to set priorities. And sometimes the more privileged person, this person's rights get a lower priority. And this can sometimes be unfair. I haven't always been fair in my life. I'm trying to be fair, but I'm only human and I can't do everything at the same time. But as an individual young boy who gets subjected to this over and over again and are assumed to be privileged even if everybody's picking on you, that is a bit of a problem, right? And I mean, there are a few things that happened to me in my life that I laughed about and was like, okay, whatever, that person was stupid. But when I think back at it, I could laugh it off because I am me with my privileges. But another person who belongs to the same category, in these cases, white, male, and non-Muslim, well, a weaker person in that same position might be filled with fear and eventually self-hatred or rage or something. I mean, I remember one time when I was told to shut up simply because I'm white. Uh, total mis a total misuse of the concept check your privilege. And I didn't mind. I know my theories and I'm secure in my position, but someone else getting beaten over the head with that. And I mean, I've been in some relationships with women in my years, and a few of them sometimes used foul play, hiding behind being female, hiding behind this idea that all women are always oppressed and all men are always oppressors. It's really convenient to bash someone over the head with. I agree on one thing with Girl Writes What, that a lot of men have been through a lot of bullshit in the name of feminism. That doesn't make feminism wrong, and it doesn't make men's rights activism right, but simply dismissing them as haters might be counterproductive. Of course, we still need to disprove bullshit from that camp, and like I said in the beginning, Hannibal the Victor 13, you are doing a very good job at that, and I salute that. But you might want to listen a little bit to them as well. Don't listen instead of being critical, but listen a bit as well. My final word is that hate is weak. You mentioned something about that. That's something I've been thinking about a long time. How pathetic hatred is. But that goes in all directions. When we base our struggle for social justice on hatred of privilege, this can spill over into hatred of categories of people who are considered privileged. I'm not saying that you're doing that. I'm not saying that I'm doing that. But I'm saying that it does happen and that a lot of innocent people get a lot of shit for that. I think that's worth thinking about. So anyway, good luck and carry on to you and everyone else trying to make the world a better place, including people in the men's rights movement. So that's all for tonight. Live long and prosper.